The North Carolina legislature has recently just passed what could be the worst voter suppression bill in the history of America. It does a lot of stuff. I apologize for how many of these are, but I want you to understand the scope of this law. So here's what it does. It implements a strict voter ID requirement, eliminates same-day voter registration, cuts early voting by a full week, raises the maximum campaign contribution to $5,000, makes it easier for voter suppression groups like True the Vote to challenge whoever they want, vastly increases the number of poll observers, those are not good things, only permitting citizens to vote in their specific precinct, bars young adults from pre-registering as 16 or 17-year-olds, repeals a state directive that high schools conduct voter registration drives, prohibits some types of paid voter registration drives, dismantles 3 state public financing programs, weakens disclosure requirements for outside spending groups, and prevents counties from extending polling hours, and in addition stops them from setting up satellite polling locations like in nursing homes for elderly people who can't leave to go vote. So basically everything you could imagine they've crammed into one awful bill that they just passed, and there is a Republican governor, so we expect that it will be signed.
I don't want to mitigate the Supreme Court's ruling on the Defense of Marriage Act. It was a great ruling. But that day, that week of rulings, it was a giant liberty loss, all things considered. You know, some of it, it's like you took a little step forward, maybe even a big step forward, but like a giant step back, because the Supreme Court's decision overturning parts of the Voting Rights Act, which meant that states with a history of segregation like North Carolina, they had to clear stuff with the Justice Department. Now they don't. This is what you're going to get. Yeah. You think that the other states aren't going to follow suit like that instantly?
They already are.
Right. Now, some of the states didn't matter. Democrats didn't win at least presidential elections there anyway. But North Carolina, changing. And of course, Barack Obama won it actually in 2008, and it was competitive in 2012.
So the great irony there is that they are proving the Supreme Court wrong. The Supreme Court said, oh, we got past all the racial stuff, so it's okay that states like North Carolina don't have to pre-clear it with the Justice Department because they're not going to make it pass any racial laws anyway. And here's a case here, let me give you some stats here, on 613,000 people, a third of whom are black, and half of whom are registered Democrats, lack photo ID in North Carolina. So this is clearly targeting Democratic voters and specifically black voters in terms of, because it is a disproportionate effect on them. Yeah. But the Supreme Court said it's okay, they can do that because they would never do that, except they did it almost immediately after your decision.
Explain this part to me. This is one of so they make it easier for voter suppression groups like True the Vote to challenge any voter who may be ineligible by requiring that challengers simply be registered in the same county or precinct, right? So that rather than precinct. So all you have to do be in the same county. So they're literally encouraging people to go, no, I don't want your vote to count. So that gets challenged. But by the same token, they removed only permitting citizens to vote in their specific district. So you can only vote in your precinct, but you can challenge black people everywhere. I mean, it directly, one thing they passed is directly in conflict with the other, or at least from a logical point of view, because anything, all they want to do is have fewer people vote.
Absolutely. And, you know, during the last election, when you had Republicans propose these types of, voter suppression laws, there would be people arguing that, no, they just want to assure that there isn't any fraud. By the way, there was a lot of data released indicating that there wasn't really fraud anyway. It was a non-issue that they were trying to make a big deal about. But now there's actual proof, because when you really look into the nitty-gritty, had we have allowed them to do what they wanted to do during that election, it would open the floodgates. Unfortunately, we've already opened the floodgates with that Supreme Court ruling. And they wanted more. They didn't want to just make sure someone had an ID. They wanted to make sure it would be as difficult as possible for minorities, for old people, or elderly people, I should say, and college students to vote, because they're going to vote for Democrats.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. Because you can say, even in a Republican mind, you can convince them, hey, look, there's voter fraud. That's why we need to check the photo ID. Otherwise, how do we know it's the person, right? But you can't justify cutting early voting by a full week.
56%, by the way, North Carolina voted early. So let's cut that in half, possibly.
There's no, people who do fraud don't necessarily vote early. There's no...
In fact,
nobody even claims that.
If they did, you'd have more time to check it.
Right. Yeah, that's right. You could catch them easier, right?
And like the same day registration and stuff like that.
And to Anna's point, go ahead.
What about repealing a state directive that high schools conduct voter registration drives in order to boost turnout among young voters?
Exactly right. It's an indisputable point, because younger people, as Anna pointed out, are more likely to vote Democratic. So they're like, we don't want to register their votes because they're going to vote Democrat. Yeah. So black people are more likely to vote Democratic, so we don't want them to vote, right? Poorer people, same thing.
And I love that they wanted to be comprehensive enough to also include a maximum campaign contribution of $5,000.
Yeah.
They increased the
And getting
campaign
rid of the
contribution
public
limit.
financing.
But
exactly.
even
let's just
more
have
so
everything.
than that is the second to last thing, weakening disclosure requirements for outside spending groups. I mean, they want as much little money to come in from Karl Rove as conceivably possible to keep restricting voting.
So that, when you put it all together, what this says is we want less voter influence, we want more donor influence.
Right, that's right.
It's
And
suppression NATO.
they're brazen about it. They didn't put it in two different bills.
Yeah.
They didn't bother trying to hide it. They're saying in this one giant bill, this isn't about voter fraud. This is about we want as little people as possible to vote because we think more voters means Democrats have a better chance of winning. And we want as much money as possible to flood into politics because Republicans are better at taking donor money and selling out to them and doing whatever their interest demands. So get rid of the voters, give us more donors.